All right, so for the last couple of times we've been talking about, or for a while we've been talking about different systems in the body. And now I'm going to talk about some different scenarios that you're likely to encounter and be asked for help with that are not specific to one system. So for example, today I'm going to talk about headaches. Headaches involve the musculoskeletal system. They can also involve the digestive system, the endocrine system, and the nervous system, circulatory system sometimes. So they can be triggered by and manifest in incorrect functioning of or unusual functioning of various different systems. And that's the way it is for a lot of real life situations. Be they diseases or other types of things that come up. A lot of the time they will involve and require support of various different systems in the body. Headaches are not really a disease. They're not exactly, maybe sometimes you could consider them a symptom of a disease. Sometimes they're just sort of a thing that happens and are sort of a normal part of the human experience. Most people have many headaches in their lives, and sometimes there's not really a major underlying reason why a headache is happening. That is to say, they're not usually signs of anything really serious. They're just sort of minor things that can go wrong that can lead to pain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the physiology of headaches, different classifications of headaches, and different strategies for dealing with them. So most headaches, all headaches involve pain, obviously. Most of them involve a small amount of inflammation. Most of them involve muscle tension, and that is something that is not necessarily super obvious with all of them, but it's very frequently a thing that is going on. So when somebody feels a headache, you know, the sensation might feel like it's deep within your skull, but usually it's on the surface. It's, well, not on the skin, but in the muscles or in the bones being moved slightly out of place by the muscles or having pressure exerted on them or tension exerted on them by the muscles and causing them to feel pain. So that's actually where the pain is coming from, is the muscles and the bones rather than deeper in. Sometimes from the sinuses also, in the case of sinus headaches, where there's pressure, fluid pressure that can build up in the sinuses. But even in sinus headaches, there is often muscle tension involved as well. So we'll talk about some different types of situations that lead to headaches, different broad categories of headaches, and some of the muscles that are often involved with headaches, just as a start. So a lot of the time people would categorize most headaches as being either sinus headaches, which are caused by pressure in the sinuses, tension headaches, which are caused by muscle tension, or migraine headaches, which are caused by, or at least which involve the nervous system and the blood vessels, contraction in the blood vessels that go into the nervous system, into the central nervous system, and maybe an imbalance of certain substances, certain neurotransmitters in the nervous system. So migraines can be a serious thing and can be a recurring thing. Most other headaches are not. Most other headaches are just kind of a minor thing that happens because of stuff being a little bit out of balance. So there are also cluster headaches, which are short, sharp pulses of pain that happen in the head, and the exact reason for them is not real clear. They're not well studied. They're difficult to study, but they can be they can manifest as very severe pain, but it's usually short. So they're probably something a lot like a migraine, but happening fast. So tension headaches are the most common or the broadest category of headache. And in a tension headache, muscles, often muscles in the neck, sometimes muscles on the skull itself, are tense to the point where they are causing pain. This can happen as a result of a spasm where a muscle slowly contracts, or maybe not so slowly, but relatively slowly contracts and pulls the things around it out of balance. Or it can happen sometimes as a result of the head being moved too quickly in one direction or the other, and one muscle getting stretched out while another contracts to compensate for that. And that would be something that would happen in falls, injuries, car accidents, things like that. Usually if somebody has a headache, most headaches will go away if someone sleeps. And that's an important thing, is most minor headaches will go away if someone sleeps. But some tension headaches don't. Sometimes sleep position can actually cause headaches, and sometimes muscle tension can get worse during sleep, or continue in spite of sleep, maybe get a little bit better and then get worse again when the person wakes up. So most of the time, if somebody has a headache that lasts through sleeping and it's not made better, and if they don't have a history of migraines or something like that, if it doesn't go away after sleeping, it's usually about there being a muscle that's very tense. So those kind of headaches can last a long time, or they sometimes will last until something is done about them. And some people live with chronic head and neck pain for a variety of reasons. So some of the muscles that are frequently involved in headaches, and I know this is a little bit of a stretch to be talking about muscle names and muscle anatomy, but the erector spinae muscle, which attaches to the back of the skull and runs along the length of the spine on either side, is one of the muscles that's frequently involved. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can type something out to send. I'm going to type the Latin names of a couple of muscles. So those are some of the muscles that I'm going to be talking about in case anybody wants to know how to spell the names. So the erector spinae attaches to the two bony protrusions that you can feel at the base of the skull, and it runs along the length of the spine. And it pulls the skull back, and it also holds the neck up straight, keeps the head from slouching forward. And since there's one on either side, one relaxing or the other can pull the head to one side, but not turn it. Then there's the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which runs from the mastoid process, just behind and below the ear, around the side of the neck, and attaches to the sternum. So that's the muscle responsible for turning, sort of turns and tilts the head when it contracts on either side. And so that muscle is very, very frequently the one that's involved in headache tension. It's a muscle that contains a lot of nerve tissue. A lot of nerve tissue runs through and around it. There are layers and layers of connective tissue around it. And it is very involved in proprioception, the sense, the being able to sense up from down, and what direction you're going and what direction you're facing and so forth. So it's very sensitive to position and direction because of the nerves in it. And because it's so innervated, it can easily result in pain, which people will often feel. Sometimes people will feel it as a crick in their neck, but sometimes people will feel the tension on the skull that is creating as a headache. So that is very frequently a muscle that is involved in headaches. Another one is the temporalis muscle, which is sort of fan-shaped and attaches to the side of the skull over here, comes down by the jaw. There's also the masseter muscle, which is involved in opening and closing the jaw. And those muscles, if you have a headache from clenching your jaw, that's what's going on. That's what's involved with that. If you have a headache from being dehydrated while you're asleep, that one's often involved too. So all of those muscles, also the orbicularis oculi, which is a round muscle that goes around the eye, and some of the other muscles, small minor muscles involved with movement of the eye, can be they can be sore in headaches as well. So sometimes people will feel a headache more in their eyes. Sometimes they'll feel it more on the side of their head, or sometimes they'll feel it on their whole head or the back of their head. Usually, if it's well, any of them can make your whole head hurt. You know, sometimes even though the pain is only coming from one place, it can make your entire head hurt. But if it's localized to one of those areas, it's usually the muscle that's in that area that is most prominently involved. So then there's the matter of why the muscles get tense in the first place. And like I said, a dramatic change in position, such as a fall or getting punched in the head or something like that, can make those muscles tense up. And sometimes, you know, if there's a history of such a thing happening, then that can be the issue. Or, you know, an extended, less dramatic strain, like if you were painting the ceiling and you've got your neck in an unusual position for a long period of time, or if you are, you know, bent over looking at something and you have your neck in a familiar but not necessarily very natural position, as we would often have if we were writing at a desk or maybe looking at a computer screen or something like that. Sort of slouched forward position where the head is flexed more forward. That's going to put more strain on the muscles back here, and eventually they're going to tense up in response to that strain and inflammation, and that can cause a headache, and is a frequent cause of headaches because there are so many occupational situations in which someone is kind of leaned over something looking at it. So that's a very frequent thing that you will see, a very frequent scenario in headaches, especially headaches that happen to be work related or that seem to be associated with doing certain tasks. And just because there is a reason for it doesn't necessarily mean that the headache is a normal outcome of that reason, right? We could all have, maybe we would have, you know, times in our life where we could handle that sort of thing and times in our life where it would result in a headache. So if everything else is in balance, maybe it's not as bad, but if some other things are starting to wear, or if some other situations are out of balance, it can result in the headache showing up. So what else causes headaches besides positional stuff and movement? Those are a big part of it, but often they're not alone in that. So weakness in those muscles can be a risk factor for headaches. Electrolytes being imbalanced can be a very big risk factor for headaches. So if people, well, the most classical example of that would be a hangover. Somebody's dehydrated as a result of alcohol. They've also got toxins in their system as a result of the alcohol. And they've got probably, because of the dehydration, taking electrolytes with it, they might have not the right mix of electrolytes in their body at the time. So you have sodium, which makes things tense up, and potassium, which makes things relax a little bit. Water, which sort of lubricates things and maybe makes it so that muscles are less likely to go into a state of spasm when they're put under strain. And all of that gets thrown off by drinking. So hangovers and the headaches that go with them are still muscle tension. There's still muscle tension involved, but they're, best understood as being an imbalance in the substances that run the muscles, the electrolytes that help with the contraction and relaxation of the muscles. So that's certainly not the only example of something like that, though. It could be from sweating. You see it a lot in people who have been sick. A lot of the time, their electrolytes will get depleted either through vomiting and diarrhea, or through sweating, or through not taking in enough fluids and or minerals because they don't feel like eating. So a lot of the time, headaches that come on the second or third day of a sickness are also about minerals being out of balance, minerals being thrown off, and that sort of thing as well. Hormonal headaches, again, same sort of thing happening. The hormones are changing how the body is handling electrolytes, and might cause fluid retention in the extremities and also headaches because there's too much sodium relative to how much potassium there is. It's a very common scenario, and so that's there can be a hormonal underlying cause, but still the mechanism is still muscle tension. And so that can either be dealt with by a few different things. Physically working on relaxing the muscle tension, trying to work on the hormones, or trying to work on the intermediate stage, which is the electrolytes. And any of those strategies can potentially be effective. And we'll get into a little more into what might be done there in a few minutes. And then another category of headaches is sinus headaches. So in a sinus headache is more about, there can be muscle tension too, but a lot of the time it is more about pressure building up in the sinuses because there's fluid in the sinuses that's not draining. And so it's actually, if you've ever looked at a human skull or even an animal skull, really, the bones where the sinuses are very delicate, and they're in some places as thin as tissue paper. And they're covered with a thin layer of mucous membrane, and then that can fill up with fluid, the air spaces in between the sinuses, which are part of the airways. They can fill up with fluid pretty quickly, pretty easily, and put pressure on those very delicate bones, and that can cause a headache because those areas are very sensitive. As you know, if you've ever been hit in the nose, it's all very sensitive. It's an area of the body that is easily provoked to pain. If you tap on your upper arm with a stick, it's not going to hurt. If you tap on your nose with the same force with the same stick, it's going to hurt. So it's much more easily provoked to pain, and the pressure from fluid building up in the sinuses can do that. There can also be a significant amount of inflammation in the mucous membranes and in the lining of the sinuses that's leading to the buildup of mucus in the first place, which can be as a result of allergies or infection. So the sinusitis itself is inflammation, and then the pressure from it can lead to further inflammation and further pain if there gets to be a lot of fluid blocking things up. And usually that kind of headache is felt primarily in the front of the face, in the front of the head and in the face. Sometimes it can be felt often in the forehead and around the eyes. But it can also be felt all over the head. And sometimes people tense up when they're in pain, And so that can sort of be self-perpetuating. Another situation that can lead to headaches is if people eat food that doesn't agree with them, or that their body has a hard time processing, or take drugs that their body doesn't agree with. Sometimes that will cause headaches. Salt will do it to just about everybody if they take enough of it. Alcohol will do it to pretty much everybody if they take enough of it. Preserved meat with nitrates in it does it to a lot of people. MSG seems to do it to some people. Whether that's a different thing than the sodium in general from salt doing it, I'm not exactly sure, but some people seem to have more of a problem with that than they do with regular sodium from salt. There's, like I said, there are sometimes people will have reactions to certain drugs that will do it to them. That differs a lot from one person to the next. Quite a few people will have headaches if they consume foods that they're slightly allergic to, not allergic enough to maybe cause something that's more obviously an allergic reaction, but just that it doesn't agree with them. So that can be an issue. Not eating can also do it. Not eating anything, letting the blood sugar get kind of low, or maybe the blood sugar doesn't get all that low, but sometimes there just maybe aren't the, or maybe not as much of the minerals that people would be getting from the food, or it might be that the body is using its stores of reserved carbohydrates, glycogen, to produce enough blood sugar to keep the body going, but that costs it a lot of water if it's releasing glycogen, and that can cause dehydration. So skipping meals often will cause headaches. That differs a lot from one person to the next, but some people, just know that if they miss meals, that it'll cause them to have headaches. Younger people don't often know this, or often haven't really realized this yet. So with adolescents, a lot of the time that can be something that they're not really aware of. Most of the time, by the time people get to be into their 20s, they realize, that some of what their triggers are. But when you're a little kid, they might not be the same as when you're 13. So if you're 13 and you're getting headaches and you don't know what it's from, you might not have drawn the connection between skipping meals and getting headaches, for instance. So that's something that you see pretty often with older kids, younger teenagers, and occasionally other people, because that sort of thing can change throughout our lives. It's not like all the changes happen right there as we, go through adolescence. Sometimes people will feel like, oh, when I was younger, I could get away with such and such, but now that I'm older, it causes headaches. So, but it can take a while to figure out. So those are some of the general causes of headaches, some of the common ones. Environmental allergies sometimes cause headaches. Kind of, there's the sinus thing, but sometimes they cause headaches that aren't seemingly sinus related. And sometimes people will get headaches in response to triggers that don't really appear to be migraines. Like, for example, certain perfumes, I'm not really sure what it is in them because it's not all of them, but certain perfumes and fragrances will give me a headache that goes away when I'm away from it. If I get away from it, it kind of fades gradually. And it's not migraine. It's just, I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it's, it doesn't agree with me. And maybe it's just pain in my sinuses from a stimulus that they don't like, or something along those lines. But people can have triggers to pollen, mold, fragrances, things like that. And those can be migraine triggers. And migraines tend to really be severe pain and tend to be part of a pattern that persists throughout someone's life or through a large part of their life. an ongoing chronic thing that manifests occasionally or intermittently as migraines, rather than just a simple headache that exists kind of as its own thing. So yeah, they can be migraine triggers, or they can just trigger headaches without them being migraines. So having said all that, I want to talk a little bit about what we do for headaches. So like I said, so one of the first things you're going to want to do for any headache is probably relieving pain. That's one of the first goals you might have. And you might think that the first thing to do would be to reach for a pain relieving herb. And that can be a thing that you do, certainly. And there are a lot of those that we use. We talked about willow. That's a common herb that people use for headaches. Has a good long traditional history of use. Wild lettuce is another one that I use sometimes. That's a pain relieving herb. But usually I select the pain relieving herb because it does something else besides just relieve pain. And one of the first things that I really want to do in the case of a headache is to relieve muscle tension, because that is usually an issue. And because most headaches go away with sleep, a lot of the time I just want to give someone something that will help them sleep, and then they can wake up without a headache. That's not always going to be a practical thing for everybody to do. If you get a headache at work, you might not have the luxury of taking the day off or of taking a nap during work time. But when possible, sleeping off a headache can be a really great way to deal with it. And my favorite herb for that is skullcap. Skullcap's a member of the mint family. It relaxes the muscles, it promotes sleep, and it relieves spasm. It relieves muscle tension. Valerian is another one that relieves tension in the muscles and can kind of help with sleep as well. Chamomile is a really good relaxing and sleep promoting herb. There's lots of others. Linden is very popular in some places for this use. And it's reasonably uncomplicated. It doesn't have any sort of addictive potential or anything like that. It's the flowers from the linden tree. So most of these are just very gentle remedies that help relieve them, relax the muscles, and promote sleep. So that's one category of things that can often be a useful tool to have in your tool chest if you are dealing with headaches. Muscle relaxing and sleep producing herbs. So, another category of things that is really helpful is heat and stretching. This is not herbal, obviously, but it's very simple, free for the most part. So putting heat on these muscle groups that we talked about, muscle pairs that we talked about, can be really helpful. Will often produce relief. Sometimes doing that in combination with some gentle stretching of those muscles by moving in the opposite direction to what they take you, the direction they take you when they're tensed up, can be helpful for relieving headaches and pain. How you go about this, stretching obviously is just physical movement, but the heat could be from a hot shower. It could be from a hot compress, like a hot washcloth or a hot towel, something like that, or a heating pad. I use, in my own house, I have an infrared light. It's just a special light bulb that screws into a normal size light socket, and although the socket that I have it in is on a cord, but it's in a little room that's lined with aromatic cedar, which I like, but is not necessarily necessary for it to be. But just heat from an infrared light can be really helpful. I also use moxibustion, which we've talked about before, which is heating places with burning mugwort, burning herbs. And for headaches, I would use, I'll show you where. This might be considered outside of your scope of practice, depending on where you live, but they're handy. This is just a rolled up stick of mugwort, and you light the end of it. And this one makes a fair bit of smoke. There's also smokeless kinds that are basically already burned to charcoal. But for instance, if I were working on the SCM, I would do it here on the belly of the muscle, and then on the ends of the muscle, up where it attaches to the skull, and then down closer to where the base of the neck, and maybe on the center of the chest as well. And that would help to relax this muscle. So, you know, in the middle of the muscle and at each end of it, basically, to make a long story short. With the temporalis, it doesn't really have, at one end is a specific point, and the other end is sort of a fan-shaped area along this, along the temple of the skull. And so that's another area that might work. It can be used for sinus drainage. There's a point right here beside the nostril, about a finger's width over from the nostril. And that will help to drain the sinuses, as will points just kind of above, and yeah, just above the eyebrows on either side of the midline of the head of the face is another area that you can do to help with sinus drainage. So that's another way simply of applying heat, really. It does contain some essential oils and other things. Which may be somewhat helpful, or they may just kind of be extra. But that's something that I would use if I had a really bad headache, and you know, if it was bad enough to go to the trouble of doing all that, as a way of applying heat to the relevant muscles. Hydrating is really important too. One of the first things that you might want to do at the first sign of a headache is take half a liter or so of water, two big glasses of water. Yeah, and more if you feel thirsty for more. But yeah, water can be really helpful. Sometimes it's just a matter of dehydration, or sometimes if there is some dehydration, even though that's not the whole reason that it's happening, fixing that can be enough to put things back in balance and allow the body to right itself. There are also electrolyte blends that can be helpful with that. You know, the one that I usually use is called Emergency. It's kind of, it's not all that great or anything. It's just sort of some minerals and vitamin C that makes a fizzy drink when you mix it with water. But it's easy to get people to take, and it's easy to take yourself. And it does have electrolytes in it. Gatorade or Pedialyte would do the same sort of thing. They have a lot of sugar in them. I mean, Gatorade does. I'm not sure how much sugar Pedialyte has in it. I've never used it, but a lot of people do. A lot of people recommend it. But you know, just hydration, getting some electrolytes can be really helpful for giving the body what it needs to fix the situation. sometimes, like I said, that's not going to fix a headache by itself, but if it's just the start of a headache, or if it's fairly early in the process, sometimes that will help to keep it from getting bad. And if you don't do that, sometimes other measures you take might not be as effective. So it's always a good idea to make sure there's a good amount of water in the body. And if the headache is part of a larger constellation of symptoms, the way it would be in a cold or a flu-like illness or something like that, then sometimes there might be things like vomiting or diarrhea that would require you to rehydrate frequently throughout the process. And even though hydrating might make some of those symptoms more dramatic, it will also usually make them go away sooner. So on the whole, it's usually a good idea to stay as hydrated as you can. So heat, hydration, sleep, herbs that helps with sleep are all important. Anti-inflammatory herbs can be really helpful. Herbs that are both pain relieving and anti-inflammatory can be good. In the case of a sinus headache, ginger is a really good thing because it causes sinus drainage and it relieves pain and it improves circulation, which helps with the hydration process. So ginger can be a really useful thing in that scenario. And, it's very well tolerated. Sometimes I would do something like lemonade with ginger and a little bit of cayenne in it, which is spicy, sour, it's hydrating, and it's pain relieving, warming, all of that kind of all mixed together. So those can be good good things to do. Some salicylate containing herbs are also frequently used for headaches. Willow I already mentioned. Violet would be another one. Wintergreen is another one. That's the herb wintergreen, not distilled oil of wintergreen, which, like other essential oils, shouldn't be taken internally. But it's a lot more familiar to a lot of people than the herb itself. So a lot of the time when I say wintergreen, I specify that I mean the plant wintergreen and not the essential oil. So all of those things can be helpful. Sometimes they're not very helpful. Sometimes if you have a bad headache and you take an anti-inflammatory for it, it doesn't make much difference. And in that case, trying to sleep it off might be better, and heat might be better. Stronger pain relieving herbs can be helpful too, although they're often incompatible with getting much done. So, something like I mentioned wild lettuce extract. Wild lettuce is a pretty strong pain reliever. It also is sedating. California poppy and other things in the poppy family are quite a bit stronger, quite a bit more sedating. They can also interfere with digestion and respiration. So I don't use those I usually don't use those unless somebody's in severe pain and I've tried some other things and they've not worked. And in that situation, maybe it's better than dealing with the pain. But they're more complicated remedies, and so I don't use them so often. Of course, avoiding triggers when possible is really important. If someone is having if someone gets headaches every month as part of their hormonal cycle, I really don't consider that normal. I consider that as something to do something about. Some people just kind of take it as like, oh, well, this is just the way it is. I really don't think that it needs to be. So sometimes gentle support for the endocrine system, like raspberry leaf, which we saw some of on our plant walk, right? Sometimes that will be helpful for it. Sometimes something a little more powerful, like black cohosh, taken during the first 14 days of the cycle, is going to be more helpful. That's going to be kind of a more complicated intervention, because it's something that somebody has to remember to take at certain times. But sometimes that can, working on the endocrine system with something like that can help to relieve some symptoms like headaches that might be showing up for that person. Another herb that I use in that capacity is partridge berry, which, hang on a second, I'll try. I was thinking that there was a way to, I want to show a picture of it, but I'm not sure how I do that. Not that. Hang on. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to share content on here. I know I've done it before, but I don't remember how. Oh, well, I don't know. So sorry about that. Partridge berry is a plant that grows in the woods here. It's a creeping ground cover with tiny spoon-shaped green leaves that are about the size of your pinky fingernail, with a single white line running down the midrib. And it has red berries that you can find on it all year. But the vine itself can be used as a tonic for the reproductive system, and often will help with things like headaches and cramps that might show up as a sort of something happening where the endocrine system is getting the musculoskeletal system a little out of balance. So, the vine is called partridge berry. Let me write that down in the chat. Partridge berry. Michella red. All right. Yeah. So partridge berry is something that is a little bit environmentally sensitive. It is something that you want to take a very small amount of from a stand. It's not really available as a cultivated herb, but you can pick a quart jar of it if you have a good stand of it, and then make that into a fresh plant tincture by adding 50% alcohol to it. And it actually has a nice pink reddish color to it, even though the plant itself is green. It gives a nice reddish color to the tincture. So it's kind of different than the usual sort of tan amber type color that most tinctures have. It's from the same family as madder, which madder has been used as a, there it is. Madder has been used as a dye plant. Here we go. Where are we? That is partridge berry. And at least on my iPhone screen, it's approximately actual size. Okay. It's not sure. Couldn't find the button for that for a minute. But yeah, that's partridge berry. And it usually grows under conifers in the forests of eastern North America from the mountains of Georgia on up to close to the Arctic. So it's pretty widespread, but selective about where it grows. And the neat thing about that plant botanically is that each fruit is made by 2 flowers, which normally you'll have a flower and it will produce a fruit or a cluster of fruit or something like that. But with that, you have 2 separate flowers that produce 1 fruit. And so when it's when the fruit is developing and the flower tubes are still attached, it looks a little bit like a uterus and fallopian tubes, which is kind of a way of remembering what we use it for. But it's a neat plant, and birds eat the berries, and so it gets planted by them all over the woods and grows in the places that are suitable for it to grow. So yeah, hormonal headaches are really muscle tension headaches and are really electrolyte disturbance based headaches, and just with a different underlying source of where that's coming from. Of course, with the headaches that are caused by either eating the wrong things or not eating anything, that's going to be, something that if it can be avoided, then great. If someone is in a situation where they can't easily avoid that, if they don't have access to food or they don't have access to food other than what causes them to have headaches, then dealing with the headache afterward is what you have to do. And those usually respond well to hydration and a little bit of warming anti-inflammatory herbs like ginger, because they essentially the water allows the body to detoxify or get rid of whatever mineral there's too much of or whatever waste product there's too much of that's causing the headache. And so working on that is helpful. Sometimes it's necessary to support the liver if somebody has frequent headaches, supporting the liver and the digestive system, as we've talked about previously with things like bitters and aromatic herbs. Sometimes that can make them less prone to headaches if they get a lot of headaches that are related to their digestive system. If somebody gets a lot of headaches that are related to constipation, then obviously, fixing the constipation with things like fiber, soluble fiber, and some occasionally laxatives if necessary, and hydration, once again, that comes up, is a really good thing to do. So if there's something obvious that's causing the headaches, then sometimes you have to support those systems. Similarly, if it's just musculature from being in an occupational situation where somebody's either craning their neck at an unusual angle or leaning over or something like that, then sometimes taking breaks throughout the day, taking short breaks and moving can help with that, even if it's just like taking a 1-minute break every few minutes to just move around a little bit, not necessarily, taking a long break or anything, but just sometimes, not staying clenched up in that same position for a long period of time. Because it's very easy for some people to get task oriented and focus on what they're doing and not be paying attention to what their body is doing and what what side effects on their body the task at hand might be having. So being more mindful of that can be important. With migraines, usually people with migraines are going to be receiving some kind of professional help for them, but there are some simple things that in the herbal world that can help with that. Feverfew is one of them that's simple enough that I don't mind talking about it here. Feverfew is a member of the sunflower family. Sometimes it's been classified as a chrysanthemum, or sometimes some people have called it a tansy, but it's really more like a chrysanthemum. But it's it contains some aromatic compounds that help with circulation in the head, and that helps with prevention of migraines. So there have been a few different studies with them, and they tend to decrease the frequency and severity of migraines in people who have them. Tarragon is another herb that I like for that. Tarragon is, it's in the genus Artemisia, which produces a lot of powerful medicinal plants. Tarragon is probably the least complicated to use of those plants. It's a kitchen spice. It doesn't have much potential to do any real harm, but it does carry some of the same benefits as far as stimulating the central nervous system, helping to increase the amount of serotonin that's present in the nerve cells, probably. And in so doing, tends to also decrease the frequency and severity of migraines. But again, with migraines, like with most other headaches, a lot of the time sleeping them off is a really good way to deal with them. So giving somebody some herbs that might help them sleep and help their body just sort of reset, and that can be, sometimes that's all there is to do. Sometimes that's the only thing that really helps. Of course, you can mitigate pain, you can decrease inflammation, circulation sometimes too. Cayenne is another herb that sometimes helps with the frequency and severity of migraines. So that's another one that is very something that people can take in a very small dose. Obviously, it can cause pain if you take too much of it, but it's not really poisonous in any conventional sense of the term. Yeah, so those are all some general strategies for dealing with various different types of headaches. Sometimes people want to say, well, what's like an herbal ibuprofen, and so you could say something like willow is, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory or something like that. And there are certainly things like that you can use, but there are a lot of other approaches besides just taking a dose of an anti-inflammatory and hoping that makes it go away. I personally have never really had much success with using over-the-counter anti-inflammatories for headaches, or herbal ones really either. I mean, if I take willow bark and I've already got a headache, if the headache is already kind of in full swing, it doesn't really do that much for it. I don't get headaches very often, but when I do, heat and movement, and then things to help me sleep, things to help me get to sleep so I can sleep it off, seem to be the way to go for me personally. So different people are going to have success with different things as far as that goes. So it's important to have multiple different strategies that you can try, and an idea of why you're using which strategy for any individual person, which is probably should be based on what you know about that person's history, like why they have a headache, for instance, and any history that you have with working with that person and have been able to see, you know, what works for them or what doesn't. All right, so any questions about any of that? All right, hang on a second. Just a moment. Okay, I am back now. All right, so for herbs that I wanted to talk about today, I was going to talk some about spearmint first. And spearmint is one of several kinds of mint. There are a lot of plants in the same genus, Mentha. Mentha is kind of like the true mints, the mint genus rather than just the mint family. So we might say that a lot of things like skullcap, for example, is in the mint family, but it's not minty and it's not in the mint genus. It's not in the same small category of plants as spearmint. It's in a larger category of plant that includes a lot of things. So there are a lot of hybrid mints that are grown in gardens, like things like chocolate mint and apple mint that are just sort of named after the smell that they have, and they don't have a particular species exactly because they're not really wild plants. They are things that people have made by breeding different strains together and keeping the traits that they liked. But spearmint is pretty common as a wild plant. It is it's native, probably native to Europe and Asia, maybe some smaller area within Eurasia, but it's basically introduced into places all around the temperate zone around the world. Here in central Kentucky, you can often find mint growing in wet fields, like fields that are along creeks that often flood, or that are just kind of low lying and are often muddy. That's where it likes to grow. And it will grow in gardens, and it will grow in old home sites. Sometimes you can find places out in the woods where people used to live and the mint still grows there that they planted whenever. It will persist in a location like that for a very long time. It has square stems, like all, well, not all, like the vast majority of members of the mint family. It has square stems and leaves that come out from the stem opposite each other. The leaves are somewhat hairy, a little bit hairy, not fuzzy and downy like mullein is, but they have some little hairs on them, and pointy like a spear, which is where it gets its name, and minty. So if you crush them up, people say, I think it was James Duke, who was an herbal writer, said that peppermint smells like candy canes and spearmint smells like toothpaste. So, which is kind of backwards, but from the fact that the substances or the products are flavored to taste like the mints rather than the other way around. But most people are a lot more familiar with the manufactured products than they are with the actual herb itself. So yeah, or no, maybe it was the spearmint tasted like chewing gum. I can't remember exactly which one he said, but anyway, it's minty, distinctively cool and minty flavored, smelling really. The flavor sometimes is like that, and sometimes it's more bitter. I mean, it will have some of the mintiness along with it, but sometimes it will be bitter. If you harvest this plant, like I said, it grows in muddy ground. You want to make sure you're harvesting it from someplace that is not downstream of any major source of pollution, because pollution can travel in water. So it's and it's very weedy, and it's very non-selective about where it grows. So it will grow in the presence of pollution. Some plants won't, but mints, for the most part, have no qualms about growing in polluted areas. And in fact, they will accumulate metals if they're growing in areas where there's heavy metal pollution. They will actually suck the metals up out of the soil, and then the metal will be in the plant. So that's not a plant that you want to harvest and use. So what do we use it for? It has a variety of different uses. On the whole, to think of it in terms of what our old time writers would say about it, it's cooling. It's got a cool nature to it. People drink mint tea in hot climates. It's very popular in hot climates as a beverage. They drink it hot, but it has a cooling effect. The herb itself has a cooling effect on the body, and is kind of considered a refreshing beverage to take if you live somewhere very hot, like in the desert. Sometimes, of course, the people put it in mint juleps, which are considered sort of a summer drink. I think, they're gross no matter what you do with them, but some people, they're probably the kind of the, I don't know, a drink that's pretty strongly associated with this region. But anyway, they're good in summertime beverages because they have this cooling property to them, this cooling feeling in the mouth and in the breath. Like when you breathe out after drinking it, it makes your breath feel cooler. So the body actually perceives this mintiness as coolness, even though it's at room temperature, or in the case of tea, actually at a very hot temperature. It feels cool. So people take it for its cooling effects. People take it in fevers because it can relieve some of the sensation of being too hot, which you get in some fevers. Sometimes people with fevers feel chills, like the outside room is colder than it should be. But if somebody's feeling really hot, then mint can be really relieving to that. And it's also a mild expectorant. It's not a real harsh expectorant the way that mullein or white pine is. It's much milder and soothing. It's soothing rather than forceful. So if somebody's got a cough that's bothering them, and it's maybe a little bit productive, but it's also painful, then mint can be really helpful for soothing that. And you might use it along with some other herb that's more strongly expectorant to keep the phlegm coming out. Like mint and horehound is a combination that's not unusual for cough drops and things like that. So it's a mild expectorant, mild decongestant. If it's brewed into a strong tea, a strong infusion, it can also be used as a wash for wounds. It's mildly antiseptic. It's not the best thing for that, but if it were what you had, it would be something you could use for that. Hang on a second. It's a very, very mild astringent. Like I said, a mild antiseptic. Often I would use, if I were using it in that capacity, I might use it along with thyme, which we've talked about before. Thyme is an antiseptic when it's used topically. It's also a bit of an expectorant too. It's more aromatic. It's more spicy, warming than mint. They're both part of the same mint family. Mint is also used for digestion. It can help with heartburn. It can help with kind of soothing the digestive system. If somebody's stomach feels sour, or if they're, like I said, having heartburn or reflux, or a lot of bloating, cramps, things like that, it can help to soothe all of that and promote good digestion. Also helps, with the breath, which can be useful too. So that's, yeah. The lid on this is very tight, but it doesn't matter. I was going to open it, but so usually when I make mint, I make it into a low alcohol tincture. I use about 20% alcohol and 80% water, and use that to tincture dried mint leaves. If you try and make a tincture of it fresh, you kind of need to do something like blend it or crush it up really strongly, or else it will take a really long time for the substances that are in it to get out of it and into the liquid. But if you dry it, they come right out into the liquid very quickly, or if you puree it. But I don't really like to do that because it feels like a lot of, I don't know, it's loud and it's messy and kind of feels unnecessary. A little too newfangled for my taste, but it produces a perfectly serviceable medicine if you puree fresh mint with alcohol and water, and then let it settle out or strain it out. So usually if I want spearmint, I usually grow it myself rather than trying to find a clean place to harvest it from, because it's really easy to grow. The one thing, as with many other mints, that you have to be careful of is not growing too much of it or letting it take over a space, because it can be pretty invasive if it finds a place that it likes. So if you grow it in a flower bed, it might try and take over the whole flower bed, and it might succeed in doing so. If you grow it in a large container, that's what I like to do, is grow it in a big pot, which I have the big pot sitting on an area where it's going to fall on pavement if it goes to seed and the seeds fall outside the pot. I try to harvest it before it goes to seed, because it's better as it's coming into flower than it is afterwards. Once the seeds have started to ripen, it starts to take, it starts to fade. The leaves start to die and lose some of their potency and things like that. It's kind of, the above ground part is done with its work, and so it starts to die back to the ground. So it's best to harvest it just as it's coming into flower. But if it were to go to seed, then the seed would not find a good place to land. So it's not going to be able to easily spread beyond the container that it's in. But it is something you can grow a lot of. You know, if you have I think the pot that I have is about 3 feet across, and I can harvest mint from it a couple of times during the summer, and harvest, you know, a big bundle of it a couple of times, and that suits me for what I need to do with it. You know, if someone were mass producing tinctures or something, obviously they'd need more than that, but I can make maybe 4 gallons of tincture out of what I grow in one large flower pot. So that's enough for me. And the 1,000 or so people who come to see me, it's not one of my most frequently used herbs, but certainly something that I do keep around a lot. And it's also something that you can add to a compound to make it taste better, which I don't always do, especially when dealing with adults. I just figure, you know, if the medicine tastes bad, then they'll be okay. That's not usually so much of a problem for people. But I do make some mint syrup, where I make it into a syrup rather than a tincture. I have a little bit of that I sometimes add to compounds for people that request it. So yeah, it's something that can be useful as a flavoring to make medicines more palatable, especially for children or, you know, particularly fussy adults. Sometimes people try to use mint for nausea, and it works in certain types of nausea. Like it works okay in hangover type nausea most of the time, but it doesn't usually work well for pregnancy associated nausea, for instance. It often makes it worse. So I'm not exactly sure what the theoretical underpinning there is. It's just something that I've noticed and that other people have noticed too. And so it is something that you'll come across recommended for nausea because it is a stomach herb. It is something that helps to soothe the stomach, but it isn't always the right thing for that. So it's usually not the first thing that I reach for. Ginger is usually really good for that.
Hey, Andrew, quick
Yeah.
question.
Mm-hmm.
On the spearmint, is that also translating over to peppermint about the hangover?
I'm not sure. I'm thinking about that. I don't know that I've ever really used peppermint for someone with a hangover, so I'm not certain. The only time I really treat hangovers is if I'm like at a festival and somebody gets hungover and I'm doing first aid or something like that. And in recent years, I haven't done a lot of that kind of festival. So, you know, I don't have as much experience with trying different things for that scenario. But it may or may not apply in the same way. Be worth a try though if you get the chance.
Right.
If you find out, let me know. I'm interested.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so spearmint is yeah, most of the time if I'm using spearmint here at the clinic, I'm using it in combination with other things to sort of back up and promote what the other herb is doing. So for instance, I might use it with thyme to make the remedy less harsh without cutting down on its effectiveness. So the thyme is an expectorant and aromatic. The spearmint is a weaker expectorant, but if you combine it with the thyme, it stays pretty strong. The thyme stays pretty strong, and the peppermint makes it a little more soothing. So I'm often using it not by itself, but in combination with other herbs that do one of the things that it does. And you know, thyme and spearmint together tastes pretty reasonable, pretty good, medicinal, but not in a really gross way. And so that's a combination that I like pretty well, both for its expectorant properties and as an antiseptic. All right. Oh, another second. Yeah, and as Gretchen points out, pregnancy-related nausea is often caused by blood sugar going down. So, you know, having a ready source of carbohydrates and keeping the nausea from coming on is often helpful. It's often the most direct and effective way to deal with it. All right. All right, so another herb that I wanted to talk to you about is chicory. We saw chicory while we were out on our walk. It has a leaf kind of like a dandelion, but then the stem, rather than just being a simple stem with a flower on the top of it, is tall and branching and has leaves growing off of the stem as well as flowers. Flower is built roughly along the same lines as a dandelion flower, but it's blue, and it doesn't have as many individual flowers in it, as many rays in it as the dandelion flower has. So it's a very common weed of roadsides and unplowed fields and things like that, and grows just about everywhere that isn't the tropics or the Arctic or a desert. It'll even grow in some almost deserty places. It's a very adaptable little weed. And chicory is a really good bitter. It's a really good, simple bitter. So if you need something bitter for the digestive system, for the liver, chicory is nice and strong for that. So very similar to dandelion in that regard. It is more starchy than dandelion, and really it has a special kind of starch in it called inulin, which is the usual kind of starch in that family of plants. And so back to what I was saying last week. Is that just last week? No, 2 weeks ago when I was talking about elecampane. I guess that was last week. I'm confused. One of the recent times that I talked to elecampane, we talked about it containing a starch called inulin. And that's also present in chicory. So similarly, it has the ability to stimulate digestion by promoting the digestive juices. And then once that starch gets into the intestines where the bacteria are, it gives them something to feed on, because your digestive system can't break it down, but the bacteria can. So it's food for gut bacteria. So in some people that produces a lot of gas, and it's just not a good remedy for them. But in most people, it doesn't really do that so much, and it can help to reestablish gut bacteria after an illness, particularly after an illness where there's been a lot of diarrhea, or where there has been a lot of fever, or where there has been the administration of antibacterial medicines. So any of those situations can really decimate the population of gut bacteria, which can throw off your entire system, because they're kind of a key source of certain micronutrients and things like that that your body uses, like vitamin B12, for instance. In the normal course of things, vitamin B12 is produced by bacteria in your digestive system. A lot of people don't have those bacteria, or don't have them in sufficient population, so they get vitamin B12 through their diet, but it is something that should be able to be made sort of within your body, and inulin helps with that, including from chicory. So the root of chicory is used two ways. It's used raw, in which case it's very, very similar to dandelion root, or it is used roasted. You can roast dandelion root too, but not that many people do. Roasted chicory root, however, is probably the more common thing to find. If you went to someplace that sold bulk herbs, you'd be more likely to find roasted chicory root than raw chicory root. So in the roasted product, the inulin has some of the inulin, some of the starch has been caramelized. It's been just sort of cooked to the point where it's where it turns brown and tastes sweeter. And this is a chemical reaction that happens when it's being heated past a certain point. So in roasted chicory root, when it's made into a liquid, it's this dark colored and roasted type of flavor that tastes a lot, doesn't taste that much like coffee, but it's brown and it's bitter and it's somewhat sweet and has a similar body to it. It's missing some of the aromatics that coffee has. And it has some other flavors of its own that are more earthy. But people use it as a substitute for coffee or an additive to coffee. And that's a culinary tradition from New Orleans and other places that used to be French colonies in North America, because they drank coffee, which came from other French colonies in Africa. But then when that was not readily available, because they lived across the ocean from it, they used chicory root to substitute or supplement that. So that kind of became a tradition in that in those areas of North America. So, you know, somewhat tied in with a bloody history of colonialism and empire, but still tastes good and can be ethically produced. So chicory, roasted chicory, when it's taken as an herb, as a remedy, it helps to promote digestion. It helps to promote elimination. So it is somewhat laxative, but just very mildly so. And it's what you might call an osmotic laxative. It's actually drawing liquid from the lymph system and from the rest of the body into the intestines to flush them out. So it's not the same type of laxative effect that actual coffee or that senna or a lot of other herbs would have. Although it does also produce it does stimulate the liver to produce some juices too, which adds to the overall effect. So it's osmotic because it draws in water, and it's choleretic or cholagogic because it makes bile flow. So it does all of that, which can be, useful. And it also helps to still help to reestablish bowel flora, and has some of the liver supporting bitter properties. The liquid, if you break open chicory, the stem or the roots, it has a white latex that comes out of it, similar to what's in dandelion as well. And that can actually be applied to various different skin lesions, and it will create a barrier that keeps moisture in. So if you're putting that on, say, a small a scar that's healing, it will actually create an environment that is more conducive to the scar healing and fading. If you're putting it on a wart, it'll actually help the wart to sort of break apart. If you're putting it on acne, it can help that to heal up faster too. So has a variety of different possible healing applications when it's applied directly to the skin. But that's only the juice that comes from the freshly broken plant. As far as I know, there's not really a way to preserve or replicate or extract those properties later on. It's something where you have to have the fresh plant on hand in order to be able to do it. And so that's a useful property that it has. That's maybe something that you can only have if you have a direct working relationship with the living plant. And there are quite a few things like that in the world of herbal medicine. There are things that are not readily packageable and shippable. They're just kind of things you have to get directly from the source. And so that's true. That's true of the sap of dandelion as well, but with chicory, because it has a different type of stem, and because the root tends to be larger, you can get quite a bit more of that from chicory. But of course, that depends on which plant you have, because sometimes dandelion is more readily available. And chicory likes to grow along edges. It likes to grow right along the path, right along trail sides. You don't usually see like a big open field of chicory the way you might with dandelion. Sometimes you do, depending on what the soil is like. But for the most part, you'll see it right along paths, sidewalks, the median of the interstate. Once you learn to recognize it, it's definitely an herb that you can recognize at highway speeds, because its color is pretty distinctive, being just like a pure blue, not a purplish blue, but just blue. And its shape and everything makes it pretty recognizable, even as you're, zooming past it 75 miles per hour or whatever. So it's once you know it, once you've learned to recognize it, you can recognize it very easily, and you will find that it is in fact everywhere. So yeah, it's another good herb to know about. And mostly I've talked about the root of the plant, which is the commercially available part. But of course, the latex comes from all parts of it. And the leaves are edible. The leaves are actually the same thing as endive. Endive is a cultivated variety of chicory. Either a descendant of chicory or a variety of chicory. There's probably a fair chance that some of the wild chicory growing out there is actually descended from endive that was grown in gardens and let to go to seed. But they're the same plant essentially. So the leaves are edible when they're small. They're edible when they're larger too. They just taste really bitter. But especially when they're small or when they first start growing in the spring, the leaves are not necessarily something you would want to eat a whole big bowl of, but something you could mix in with other leaves for a salad or a bowl of greens. Often chicory and chickweed and dandelion are all coming up at the same time, and that can make kind of a good, somewhat bitter spring salad. Also, mosh or valerianella, if you know what that is. It's another wild green that grows around here that's very edible. So all of those are kind of coming up and at their best eating time around the same time in the spring, late April, early May, somewhere in there. And so that can be, it's good food, and it's also something that in historical times people would eat bitter greens in the spring because they spent all winter eating things like dried salted meat and grains, things that preserve well and not fresh food. So it really can kind of help to get your juices flowing again and get your digestive system primed for eating more fresh foods again. Yeah. Hold on just a second. Okay. Yeah, mosh is also sometimes called corn salad, or its Latin name is valerianella. Look it up. It's a neat little green. So yeah, I guess that's basically nice. Yeah. All right, so that's basically all I have to say about chicory. Any questions about either of those herbs, or about the headaches either? Let's see. What question is, what are your considerations for when to give or not to give mint for heartburn, GERD, etc.? So I would not really consider there to be any contraindications other than someone not liking it or feeling like it didn't agree with them if they tried it. With heartburn and GERD, I would want to, first of all, make sure that the person is, before doing anything else about it, try and make sure that they're not constipated and that they're well hydrated, because those can be major factors for both. But other than that, it's pretty much, it's okay to give. Sometimes mint along with bitters can be a really useful thing in that situation. Or sometimes something like apple cider vinegar that's very sour will work better. So a lot of the time I would try something like a spoonful of apple cider vinegar first, and if that didn't deal with it, then maybe go on to something like mint, maybe mint and chicory together, or maybe mint and some other bitter herb together, to try and soothe the stomach and keep things moving in a downward direction rather than coming back up. but I don't really consider it to have any particular situations where it needs to be avoided for something like that. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. All right. No, hang on just a second. Yeah, good. Okay. So it is middle of October now. A couple people have contacted me about being ready with their plant collections. So I'm excited to look at those from everybody as they become available. And probably what I'll do is set up time for each of you to either meet with me in person or over Zoom, and we can look at what you have. And I'm definitely looking forward to that process with everybody. And also, it's a good time to be thinking about what you're going to do as far as your next project goes. You know, something that you can use, where you can use the skills that you've learned to do something that you feel like is meaningful in terms of using herbal medicine in your life, whether that's starting a project with your community, or you know, making an herb garden, or making a product, or something like that. Can be just about anything, but it should be something big, sort of big, and something that incorporates multiple aspects of what you've learned so far. So, you know, I hope everybody will be thinking about that sort of thing, and probably I'll talk to each of you about it when I talk to you about your plant collections. And with the plant collections, you know, I suggested the beginning of November as a time to have them finished. I don't think of that as like a due date or anything like that. I just think of that as being a good time, because there are going to be a lot fewer plants available after that. And that's kind of the midpoint of the course, which congratulations to everybody who has made it this far. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to working with all of you on that, and on seeing all of the plant collections that people have made so far. And also, if you haven't seen it yet, I finally managed to get the herb walk online at about 3 in the morning earlier today. So that's up for anybody who wants to see it now. And I would encourage everybody to watch it a time or two, especially if you weren't there. But even if you were, it might be worth watching again. And yeah, of course, if you have any questions on any of the things there, feel free to make comments in the comment section, and I will try and answer any of those that come up.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Any further questions before we go? All right. Well, thank you all very much, and I will talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank you.
night.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.